Hello, everyone. Hi, my name is Akosh. I'm the host of Airtime Webinars, which is a biweekly series of discussions with research and product leaders about topics that they care about. Today, I'll be talking to Erica Gibson about understanding why customers churn. Why do they leave your service or your product behind? Now, what you need to know about Erica is that she's the co-founder of Before You Code, a consultancy helping companies to decide what to build before they code. She has a PhD in medical anthropology, and she also worked in academia for years before becoming a UX leader at companies like Telenor or SumUp. Erica, it's a pleasure to have you here. Thanks so much for accepting my invitation and joining the Airtime webinars. And just as a starter, I'd love to hear a little about yourself and your background and what you've been doing.
Thanks, Akash. Thanks so much for having me. Sure. So as you said, I have a PhD in medical anthropology, and I was in academia for many years. I was a professor of anthropology and women's and gender studies at the University of South Carolina. I'm originally from New Orleans, Louisiana, and now I live in Oslo, Norway, which is a different NO from the one I'm from in climate and culture. Because I'm a former professor, I am quite a methods nerd. And so as I transitioned into technology, I practiced what I preached when I was a professor. So I taught a research methods graduate level class and taught the students how to do these kinds of things, in whatever role that they had. It was mostly students from the social sciences. And I transitioned from academia into tech in 2014. So it's been 10 years already. I can't believe that I've been doing this for 10 years already. I moved to Norway in 2017 to take a job at Telenor, which is a giant telco that was in 13 business units at the time. It's not in so many countries now, but at the time we had 13 different countries that we served. I've also worked in media and fintech, as you know, and then health tech, which is kind of using my medical anthropology background a little bit more. And lately, I've become increasingly interested in working with projects around the climate and environment, because that's a cause that's dear to my heart that I think we should all care about. And so I've been taking on a lot of projects through Before You Code that deal with environmental issues or climate policy issues. So that's been a fun year for me this year, doing those things.
By all means. A question about New Orleans and Oslo. Do you have a lot of blues in Oslo, or?
We have some. We have a club called
blues?
Blå, which means blue, and they have kind of like Sunday night jams every week. And so, yeah, we could go see some live music in Oslo here too. So it's not too bad. And we have a lot of musicians that come through that are blues and jazz musicians.
Nice.
Norway has a big jazz scene. Yeah.
I've been to the Jazz Fest in New Orleans. It blew me away. It's fantastic. Like anybody out there, if you like blues, if you like gospel or jazz, this is the place. It's the place to be.
New Orleans Jazz and Heritage Festival every April. Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. There we go. That could be the topic of a separate webinar.
Sure.
I try to keep myself on track. Okay, so the theme of the day is churn and understanding why customer leave a product or service. And I would like to start from a bird view and getting your experience from companies like Telenor and other ones. Like in your experience in these various companies, how much effort was put into understanding why customers leave compared to how to get new customers and how to make existing customers happier?
Sure. What I can tell you, Akash, is like from the bird's eye perspective, there wasn't enough done in the big companies that I worked in, right? Yeah. So the short answer to the question is like, no, there isn't enough effort put into researching churn or thinking about it like prospectively. It's much more retrospective, right? Like you've already lost the customers, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, what do we do about this? And now let's try to fix it kind of after the fact, instead of trying to understand beforehand when customers might churn or what the patterns are that they're experiencing that can lead to them deciding, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to use your product or service anymore.
Yeah, and what you said is the perfect segue to my next question, which is, how should we think about churn? And I know that there are a lot of different, but there are B2C, B2B products. So there's a lot of variety out there. But I'd like to get your thinking of, is churn, is it a spontaneous decisions that I get fed up with someone because of one single experience? or is it a process that builds up? Or maybe I'm thinking about it the wrong way. How are you thinking about churn?
I mean, if you think about your own experiences with companies or services, you can probably think of things in your life where it's been both, right? Where there has just been some really bad customer service and you said, you know what, I'm done. Like this breaks it for me, right?
Yeah.
So those spontaneous
Mm.
churns are almost like you can't come back from those in many ways, right? Because it's such a breaking point for the customer if they do it spontaneously. The ones where it's more of a buildup and there's some unsatisfaction, those are the ones that we can really think about beforehand and start to do our research beforehand to try to nip it in the bud before the person, the user, the company churns, right? So there's always a trigger. And so the trigger may be something that's so big that you can't ignore it and you want to quit that service immediately, right? Or it could be, I hear the competitor's better and maybe they have a better pricing offer and I'm just not satisfied with the level of customer service that I'm getting. And so it's all these little tiny pieces that are building and building in your customer or your user's mind that are starting to add up. And at some point they say, okay, you know what? Like the pain of these little things building up is greater than the pain of switching and trying something new. And those are the customers you can really prevent from churning, and you can really look for those patterns as they're building. And that's where kind of like the user research angle of prevention is key, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. But I think it's this is a very important aspect that there are these, let's call them discrete points in time when the customer has experiences something negative. And now, as you were explaining, it reminded me of it's like it's a positive example in the end, but reminded me of a short story. A few weeks ago, I was on Madeira and I rented a car, right? And Madeira, it has very steep hills, and our car just died on the very first day in the morning, clutch gone, and it just
Gone.
started sliding to bed. Okay, now that's a bad experience. You have two young kids. Now that's how you lose a customer. I called the company in 30 minutes. They had a taxi there. They took my family home in 2 hours. I had a new car and I was back in my apartment. I even got a free upgrade. And this sort of like how company deals with like a potential churning event, it can actually
Yes.
flip the experience around.
Yeah.
At least in my little story, it flipped it around.
Right. And you went from someone who probably never would have did business with them again if it had gone the opposite way,
Exactly.
to telling your friends, if you go to Madeira, this is the company you want to use, right? You become a supporter, an amplifier instead of a detractor or somebody who's like going to go post a negative review online, right?
Yeah, precisely. Let's go back to your point about like tracking and monitoring,
Mm. Mm.
these kind of churn events. What
Sure.
are the and like feel free to bring a few examples. I know my
Yeah.
question is very generic, so I love
Yeah.
taking examples from your past. Is like what are some data points, either like quantitative or qualitative, that you gathered in the past to understand
Sure.
this sort of building up of a churn experience for a customer.
Right. So I think in product, a lot of time, and in UX, we talk about user journeys, right? So how does a user use your product? You can also think of churn as one of the user journeys through your product or your service that you want to be thinking about from onboarding to offboarding, right? So from the first time they touch your product or service to when they quit, whether that's good churn or bad churn, and we can kind of talk about that in a minute, like what's a good churn versus a bad churn. But there are ways to kind of take the pulse of your user or your customer the whole way through that user journey of their experience of whatever it is that you're offering, right? And so, for instance, you want to keep the lines of communication with that customer or that user open the whole way through your product or service journey. And so there are ways that you can check in, and there are ways that you can do this that are completely hands off. Like I'm a user researcher. I love qualitative research. I love going out and talking to people, but I'm also a mixed methods researcher at heart. And I know we need those quantitative data points as well. And that's where you can kind of start to use those throughout the beginning of the user journey to see how things are going. So what are some things you can do? If you have an app on the App Store, what do the reviews say, right? Are people having a smooth onboarding journey? Are they talking good about your app? right? Or the same thing, any kind of like Trustpilot websites, your backend analytics you can look at and see like how many people started on board and then dropped out. Can we see where they dropped out in the process? If your company sends out net promoter score surveys, right? Like, are you likely to recommend this product 1 to 10, right? And those 9 10s are like the yeses, like they're very happy with it. The 7 8s are the ones who are not detractors, but they're not like going to go out and sing your praises either, right? So if you can start collecting data on those 7 and 8s, those are people you want to think about that could potentially churn for some of those reasons we talked about earlier, where it just builds step by step, right? So they're not 100% satisfied. They're not going to necessarily recommend you to their friends. They're not leaving either. So those are people where you'd want to like maybe send out another little survey and say, oh, what could we be doing better? Or if you can, get some qualitative interviews with some of those 7s and 8s to say, hey, what's your experience with our product? Can you walk me through it? Can you show me how you use it on camera, right? Because this is what's going to tell you, and this is what I'm talking about, is like part of the user journey and the additive process of figuring out when those inflection points are, when people might start to think about churning, that you can nip in the bud and kind of like prevent before they happen sometimes.
Yeah. In a B2B setting, and maybe your experience as SumUp could be relevant here. How about, do you have an experience like relying on discussions between key account managers and
Yes.
customers, and just how would you? I'm a researcher. I'd love to. Maybe I see some things in the data in the behavior of a particular client. How do I? Maybe I don't have direct access to that customer, but how do I talk to my colleague to ask the right questions that I would need to understand if that customer is up for churning or not, and help my key account manager?
This is such a great point, Akash, because this should not be an individual endeavor in a company. There should not be one person who's stressed about churn and then everybody else is like, that's their job, right? There are so many people in the other teams that you work with who can support each other on this, right? And so your key account managers, your salespeople, your marketing people, your customer service representatives, right? All of the people who are hands-on. Like if you're B2B and you have big business customers that you want to keep happy, that key account manager should already have a personal relationship. So if they start to get negative feedback, or somebody starts asking, oh, well, when's the cancellation date for this service, right? Those are, hey, clues. We need to do a little bit of hand-holding on this account to see what's going on. Let me pull in a user researcher or a designer or a product manager who's worried about churn and see what they need to know. Because sometimes it's simple fixes, right? Sometimes there's that low-hanging fruit that you can go out and make a simple fix to something like, oh, I want to organize things this way, or I want to search for things this way, right? And you can put it into, your tech team and say, hey, can we get this, in the next quarter? And then it's done and it makes that customer happy. Don't do it for one customer, but if you see a pattern, if that customer is complaining about it, go check your data, right? Go check reviews, go check your backend data, go check your analytics and say, is this a pattern that I'm seeing where other people might benefit from this too? And ask your salespeople too, what are the competitors doing? You got to stay up. You can't, just worry about your product. You have to worry about your competitors and what else is going on in the market and what they're doing that might be addressing a customer need that you're not, right? And so it's so key to have these conversations across teams in a company. If you have a localization unit, if you work in different countries, right? Sometimes there's an issue around localization that you might not know about, you might not be culturally aware of. And if you go talk to them, they might say, well, in Spain, we do it like this, right? In Madeira, we do it like this. In Oslo, it's different, right? And so just having those people who communicate with the customers or your users in a different manner is so important, because they're going to have insights, and you can get your user researcher to come in and say, like, here's some ways to ask open-ended questions when you talk to the customer next. Like, what could we do better, right? Or, how do you feel when you're using this product, right? Like, not do you feel bad? Like, let's not put a negative in their head right away, right? But like, let's ask some open-ended, non-leading questions to get at what's actually going on that's causing them to think like, maybe I don't want to renew next time. Or if they're questioning the price and saying like, oh, your competitor has this going on, it's like, now's the time to give them an offer, not after they've already churned. right?
Yeah. And now that you mentioned localization, it reminded me
Mhm.
of the fact that it actually it can lead to a higher impact. I heard a story a few years ago. There's this amazing American mattress company called Casper,
Yeah.
and they used to be available in Germany,
In Germany.
and they pulled out in 2019, 2020. And
Yep.
a story that I heard was that they replicated the so to say the onboarding, the purchase process that they have in the US. But it turned out that Germans they have a different way of picking and buying mattresses. So they struggle to replicate the success that they had in the US. And I think eventually it not just led to losing customers, but led to leaving a market. Um,
Exactly. Exactly. And so things like localization are so important, right? And so little tweaks can make a big difference in how you approach the customer and whether or not they're going to stay with your product.
yeah. Now, so just to summarize what I heard and correct me if I heard wrong. Um, Data is a friend of yours. Check the
Hmm.
data. Make sure that you're tracking important events, moments that matter. Maybe that's a
Yes,
good
that's a great way to put it. Yes.
a good term for that in the user journey. Then surveys, you mentioned NPS, for instance,
Hmm.
and understanding why people give you a 7 or an 8. Those are the ones that may churn later
Yep.
on. And the third important bucket of feedback and information was talking to your customer-facing colleagues. Yeah, sales, key account management, and support tickets or public reviews.
Yes.
Right? Those are immediately like
Exactly.
five various sources
That
that
you
should give
probably
you.
already have at your disposal. You don't have to
Yeah,
go out and create a survey. You probably already have it somewhere, right? And I
yeah,
think one of the number one things that we see like in our consultancy when we go out and work with new product organizations, right? Or startups is they have all this data and they're just not using it. And it's like go mine the data that you already have. You don't need to reinvent the wheel. Go see what you've already got before you start going out and doing interviews or before you put together a new survey, right? I think you mentioned
yeah,
like the WeWork survey, like doing the continuous exit survey. That's
yeah,
great. If you start putting things like that into place as soon as you push products to the market or as soon as you push services to the market, that's going to help you collect data. But you've got to use the data at the end of the day. If you don't use the data, then there was no point in collecting it, right? So if you're not going to do
yeah,
anything about why people are telling you they might churn, then go ahead and kiss them goodbye because they're going to churn.
yeah, yeah. Now let's talk about the churn event. Like a customer
Hmm.
leaves, and you mentioned a few minutes ago, like there's good and bad churn. I'd love to understand what you meant by that. What's a good churn and what's a bad churn?
Sure. So we can talk about that in the case of SumUp. So SumUp is a fintech company, right? And what we did was we had little card readers. Our main business at the time that I was working for them was having little card readers that small businesses could take credit card payments through, right? I started working at SumUp in August of 2020, which was not a great time for small businesses, right? And so
Yeah,
what happened? A lot of people used their SumUp card reader in their small business that was their side hustle, right? And so people shut down their accounts. Well, they shut down their accounts because they didn't have business, right? That's kind of it's not good positive for them, but it's a good churn because there's nothing that we can do to prevent that customer from leaving at that time. The best thing we can do at that point in a good churn situation where they're just closing their business, they don't need the card reader anymore, is give them a great exit so that in 2022, if they have time to go back to that hobby business or that side business that they have,
yeah,
they're going to remember, oh, well, when I had to cancel with SumUp, they made it easy, they were polite, and they gave me a reason to recommend them or to come back, right? So when we think of good churn, it's really what I'm saying is people don't need your product or service anymore for a certain reason, right? And
yeah.
there's nothing you can do. And that's okay because you're not going to serve 100% of the needs of the population 100% of the time. It's just statistics, right?
Okay. Um,
So you want to
before,
make that exit the best possible you can.
so I have before we move to the other
Yeah.
category of churn,
Yeah.
in my personal experience, some companies um, they make it very difficult to churn, even when I want and I have a legitimate reason. What do you think about that practice?
I mean, you can keep a customer by doing that, but for how long? And how much damage does that do to your reputation? I mean, I'm from the US, and gyms, any kind of subscription membership, they will find every sneaky way to keep you as a customer and to not let you cancel, right? They make it hard. They make it like, oh, you have to notify us 30 days in advance. So now you're paying another 30 days. Well, like the EU protections, a lot of them, they can't do that here, right? And so we have a subscription or a service. It's a one-click cancellation in many ways, right? And I think when companies make decisions like that, they really need to weigh the positives and the negatives that come from that. Is their population of who they're serving big enough that it's okay to burn those bridges to try to keep those people 3 months longer, let's say? Right?
Yeah. Now let's talk about the bad churn.
Yeah. So these are the people who get fed up, right? These are the people who are like, the price is too high, or I got bad customer service, or, whatever one of the millions of reasons that people churn is, depending on what your service is and what you're doing. Exit surveys, right, are a way that we can look at this. Like if they're going to go, okay, send them an exit survey. Are you going to get a lot of responses for that? Not necessarily, right? You're probably going to get the really angry ones, but that's data. That's still usable data, right? I think in many cases, what we also need to do, which we haven't talked about, Akash, is like segmentation of the churn. So who's churning for what reason? So again, you can use the data that you already have probably for this to see as much as you can, like why people churn. So if you have an exit survey, was it for financial reasons? Was it because they closed their business? Was it because of bad customer service? Was it because we didn't offer them a feature that they needed that they could get from a competitor? What have you, right? So if you can start to segmentize that population of churned users and think, which are the ones that we should have been able to keep, right? So the ones who didn't close their business. Price wasn't the bottom line, because it's just, there's a cheaper alternative, and like the price is the number one thing. It's nothing you did wrong. It's if you can't meet me at the price point, then I gotta go, right? And that's, those may be the customers you want to go after. So deciding on which segment of the churn customers you want to look at. And then this is where those front-facing people in your company can really help you, because you want to maybe send an email or a personal communication. You don't want to send a survey. For those customers you really would have wanted to keep, and you want to understand what their motivations were and maybe where in that user journey they started to think, this is not right for me anymore. You want to really personalize that. And that's where I would send out a user researcher to do an individual interview and say, like, give me 30 minutes of your time, give them an incentive if possible. If you really want them back, can you give them something like a discount or a 3-month free service period or something like that to try to repair that relationship? But that's when you kind of want to personalize and do that more in-depth research to understand.
When we talk about exit surveys, do you have any favorite questions that you found very helpful over the last years?
I mean, honestly, like they don't often ask user researchers what questions to ask in exit surveys, right? It's generally like the same kind of questions, right? It's like, oh, what could we have done better? What were you missing? Why did you churn? And usually it's like a list of things you can check off. Like they don't ask churn, obviously, because that's not a phrase that anybody in the real world uses, but why did you leave? Or, I think, you can ask those standard questions, but if you have time to go out and do 5 interviews with people who are in that segment that you really wanted to keep, you want to know how to prevent the next 5 from churning, take that time to sit down with them and talk to them if you can get them, if your sales manager can get them for you, or you yourself as a manager can reach out. Because a personalized email, I mean, if somebody from that car company, if you had a bad experience and they had emailed you and said, Akash, I'm so sorry, this did not go the way it was supposed to go. This is not how we want to treat our customers. Can I please sit down with you for a 30-minute conversation to understand your frustration and what we could have done better? You're much more likely to answer that than if I send you a 10-question survey from SurveyMonkey. That's just like, it's a waste of my time.
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
And you preempted one of the questions that I wanted to ask, is how you motivate people to give you answers or participate in an interview. And the example that you brought was amazing. It wasn't monetary, or it wasn't a discount or something. It was just
Personalization.
the tone of voice, the personalization, that you feel that somebody's really caring for you on the other side, and it's not just an automatically generated email.
Exactly. I don't know if you remember this. I can give this example from SumUp, I think, because it was so long ago. But we had a person churn, and we sent a user researcher out to do an interview. And this was during COVID, and so it was like when small businesses were closing. And we had video of it. We showed it internally all the time. And it was like our user was like crying on camera, talking about like how she had no business. There was no money. So of course she can't pay for our service because there's just no business. And this is why, you know, she's not using her card reader this month. And it was so impactful internally to say, like, these are real people who are our customers, and they're real users experiencing real pain. And sometimes, you know, there's nothing we can do. But the fact that we went out and talked to her and gave her our time and said, we really are concerned about what you're experiencing, right? That made all the difference in the world, right? And she was one of those people that came back and started using her card reader again when business picked up. And she could have very easily been like, nope, I'm done with you. You know, if we had sent her like a 10-question survey and she's like, I'm not even going to answer this or whatever, right? And it also helped our teams be more empathetic and understanding of what our customers were going through and what was really happening like in their day to day, right? It wasn't just a tech issue that we could easily fix. This is something we can't fix. And this is another thing, Akos, and I think we haven't talked about this yet. You have to know which problems are solvable by your company, right? In order to address the underlying issues for why people churn. So like we were talking about cost, right, earlier. If it's the cost is the issue and you can't bring your prices down and they're going to churn because they're going to go to a competitor that's cheaper, they treat them well because they might come back if they don't get the service they want there, right? But talk to your tech teams, talk to your designers. Say, do we even have the scope to put in this additional feature that it seems like there's a pattern of customers wanting? Know what you are able to change and do before you go out and promise the world too.
Yeah. Erica, earlier you mentioned in the very beginning that people start or companies start to become really interested in churn when the churn rate increases and people start leaving your business. Is this a legitimate approach that that companies focus on, or a good use of resources, that they focus on churn when churn is high, and when churn is low, then why research it? It's not a problem. There are other things that we can. Most companies have only so many researchers, if any, these days. What do you
Hire
think
us.
about this? Yeah, but solution one. But on a higher level, what do you think about like continuously researching churn, or dedicating resources when it's really painful and you see a large or a jump in your churn data?
I mean, how much are you willing to let it go, right? How much are you willing to lose? I think there are facts and figures. I don't have them at hand, but if you go Google, like how much like does it take to acquire a new customer versus keeping a current one? The acquisition costs are way higher, right? And so for every new customer that comes in, that's great. But for every one you lose, it's like, that's a chunk of money you've already spent that's now gone, right? And so why not use an ounce of prevention instead of a pound of cure, right? Start building this in to your sprints, right? To say, like, have the product manager or somebody, you know, maybe at least monthly, go in and check, like, what are the comments saying in the reviews? What's customer service hearing about our product or our piece of it, right? Or our service? What are the competitors doing, right?
Yeah.
And then how does that affect what we should do next? And sometimes it's not adding, right? If it ain't broke, don't fix it, we say in America, right? And the companies have a lot of like, we got to keep going. We got to push something new. We got to make it better. We got to do something different so that they know that we're different from our competitor. And it's like, sometimes like, no, you just need to leave well enough alone because the people are very happy with your product. And when you mess with it too much, then you're breaking the experience, right? And so I think when you're in touch with your customer and you're listening to what's going on throughout your different data collection points, throughout the user journey, throughout the product lifecycle, you're going to be much more prepared and probably make better bets to begin with on the products and services and features that you build so that this doesn't happen at these catastrophic rates. I mean, I've seen one complete catastrophic churn event in my time. I will not name the company, but it was bad. And they pulled people from all over the company to do customer support. It was that bad. Like, it didn't matter if you were the president. It didn't matter if you were the user researcher. It didn't matter if you were in sales. You're now on the customer support line. You don't ever want to get to that point, right? Because then it's too late. Because if you messed up that bad, you could just say bye to all those people that just walked and the 10 friends that they told about it who will never become your customers. So it's much better to do that preventative work and just have it become a part of your cycle, right? Whatever your product way of work is, just build it in as soon as you can. And if it wasn't done from the beginning, there's no better time to start than now. So start looking at that data that you already have now and thinking about ways that you can figure out where in that user journey that churn is likely to happen before it starts.
Okay, so you have this a regular pulse check.
Yeah.
Let's put it
Monthly, quarterly, put it,
quarterly.
whatever makes sense, right? Whatever makes sense for your company. Don't do it annually. Don't do it once every 10 years, right? Don't wait till the catastrophic event happens, certainly, if you can at all help it.
Yeah, absolutely. Erica, thanks so much. I see the first few questions trickling in the comments. For anyone, any of you listening out there, feel free to pick Erica's mind. Bring your problems and questions to her. This is your moment. I'm going to start putting the questions on the screen, and we're going to start with Sweta's questions about sifting through the data. This is like a very practical question, how you go about that and how you split work.
So I thought this is a great question because this goes back to what I was talking about earlier when I was talking about like talking to your salespeople or your key account managers. It's the same thing. If you have a data analyst, yes. If you can get them to build you a dashboard, great, right? If you can get them to comb through the data and clean it for you, and they can say like, here's some patterns that we're seeing that might be concerning about people dropping off in product usage, because that's one of the things you can do, right? If people are using your product or your service a lot, and then that curve starts to go down, okay, let's see if there's a pattern in the people where the curve is going down and what's going on with that, right? So absolutely, if you have a data analyst, that's great. You know, if you have a tech lead who's really into looking at the data to figure things out, that's great if it's a small company, right? But yes, absolutely, pull people in. If you're a PM or, you know, a tech lead or a designer or a researcher, pull people in with that expertise so you don't have to do it all yourself. Let the data people help you with the data. Let the sales people help you with the perspectives from what they hear, right? Let the customer success people help you. The same thing, let your tech leads help you with what's doable and what's not. So absolutely, you don't have to do it all yourself. But if you can get them to create dashboards that you can easily go in and check, like during a stand-up or during a sprint where you're focused on what's going on with our customer this month, right? That's a great thing to have in your back pocket.
Thank you. I have Pallavi left a longer comment here in question. I need to get on my toes here. But the question is, I let you read through, Erica,
Yeah, I'm reading it.
The void in the meantime. The question is ultimately about some predictors from some KPIs related to churn in a B2B context. Is there anything from your experience with the companies where you led research or in your consultancy that you can share?
Honestly, no, because it's so dependent on the individual company and like what you're trying to do, what the period is that you're interested in. I think we didn't talk about that too, but like defining the customer segmentation we talked about, but also defining the period in which you want to measure churn. So is churn happening seasonally, right? Is churn happening only when you raise the prices or only when you introduce a new feature that you think everybody wanted that broke the experience, right? I think this is a question you can answer better yourself. What are the inflection points for your product or service that are important where you can look at that data? Like, I think I saw like number of licenses, right? Is it people in your company with a huge number of licenses that are more likely to churn? Or is it the ones with just one or two who maybe aren't going to be as big a customers with a large customer lifetime value, right? And so those are things you can look at. But you kind of have to be immersed in your own data to know what those data points are. It's better for you to look than for me to tell you.
Yeah, maybe I bring in here another angle, something that this question reminded me of. When I look at the customer base of Airtime, and originally when I thought about churn, I was tracking usage, and when I see that usage declines, I got worried, and then I thought, okay, now this customer is going to churn because they don't see any value from my product, but it's a subscription-based product, so
Right.
at one point they will stop paying. And but one thing I realized that this sort of churn proxy was good for certain customer segments and wasn't good for others. And
Exactly.
for the enterprise, my enterprise clients, their usage can go down to zero, but they won't churn because it took them so long to get the product accepted, taken through procurement and everything, and they will, and eventually they will use it again.
That's right. They'll remember, oh, wait, we have this resource. Let's go look.
Let's go look. So for them, they won't churn. But if it's a startup, early stage, usage goes down, then it's
call
the
them.
Signal. I need to call them. So I just wanted to put this thought out there that the churn maybe there are not universal churn KPIs out there, but you have certain customer segments in your database, and they will have their own dedicated KPIs for churning.
Exactly. That is a perfect example of thinking about segmentation, right? And what might churn in one case and not in another. That's a great example. And that's you knowing your own company and being familiar with your own user data. So that's a great example.
Yeah. I have another question from Nishant about, well, I'll let you read through that.
Sure. I think, yeah, dedicated user forums are a great place to go look. This is qualitative data, right? Because it's a lot of open-ended data where people are just talking about your product in a positive or a negative way. So I would say this is a great place where you can go in with a user researcher or your data analyst to look for patterns or look, if you know that you're looking for something like new features wanted, for example. Like pull all of that stuff into a document that you can search or a spreadsheet that you can search, right? And see how many times the word feature pops up. And then start to pull out relevant quotes into a database and see if you see a pattern, right? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are definitely questions that can be answered which wouldn't be through an email survey. And the great thing about this, Nishant, is you can go through and look for those patterns in these forums. And then you can develop a survey to send out to people to see if you've got it right. And that's going back to that triangulating data that we were talking about and that somebody asked about earlier. Like, do you have to do it all yourself? Like, no, this is where you can, get somebody in your company to develop and send out the survey, get the data analyst to look at this with you, and then see if those patterns are actually following through and actually correct. Like, do people want this feature? Is it enough to where we should put this in to tech production? Yeah.
Yeah. I have a very interesting question also from Christina, who talks about the two-sided marketplace, right? It's not like a classic B2C context. I'm selling a product like Converse shoes or something else. What are your thoughts on her questions?
Sure. I mean, this is kind of what we dealt with at SumUp, right? We had very different clientele in different stages of businesses and sizes and SumUp. And I think this is where key account managers can help you with one segmentation, right? And maybe product managers and thinking about different ways to highlight your services can help in another way. Again, so customer segmentation, understanding those needs, understanding how they might use your product differently and what are those key indicators. Like when price is the number one concern, there's really not a lot you can do to shift people's minds about that, right? Like at some point, if they can't afford it, it doesn't matter how much value you provide. And so can you do a lower cost option with fewer features and like maybe not as much hand-holding support than that higher cost option that's going to have your key account managers, you're going to have a dedicated customer support line that's 24/7, whatever it is, right? So how can you nail it for two audiences at the same time? And that's hard to do, right? And big companies can do it because they got a lot of money, right? But if you're a small company trying to do that, it might be worth it just to target one side for a little while. Yeah, that's a
Yeah.
hard one.
Yeah. It's always difficult. The question from Alok about when it comes to a new product that you want to bring to the market, improving an existing process, making it more efficient, but at the same time requiring a higher compensation for that, higher price. The question is, how would you address this problem? And correct me if I'm wrong, it may not be like directly churn related, but it's like a question when you bring a new service that could be more costly, how do you validate that this could fly?
I mean, you got to get test users and prove your value, right? And you got to, those are those loud customers that you want who are going to go preach to their friends who have the money to pay for it. That's really, I mean, that's really hard, right? Because it's like price is huge, you know, quality is also huge, but at the end of the day, you got to see what the workarounds are. You got to see what your competitors are doing, and you have to price competitively. So even though it might be slightly pricier, you have to really show value to the customer early on. And so don't give them a minimum viable product, right? You want it to be something that's very useful and usable and pleasant to use from the get-go.
Yeah, this is also very interesting. We haven't talked about pricing, but like I think Y Combinator has this wisdom that that keep increasing your prices until your churn
Until
hits
you
a certain rate, and then, but it's I mean being you know, a founder or someone who's responsible for pricing, there's also an inherent uncertainty and worry that you start increasing your prices and then you lose you lose customers. You may use a lot and you don't know in advance the elasticity
line.
curve of how will people react. Do you have any thoughts on that? Like
Nope. Absolutely not. That is not my job, and I'm very glad.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Let's go to this is going to be the last. Okay, two more questions. Let's make them quick. Okay, Erica, we have like we're in the last minute. So
oh my gosh, yeah.
Yeah. So getting this mixed method research approach that you suggested, like using data, survey, interviews. What would you be as your suggestion to someone who gets started with that? What are the skills and tools that they should be acquainted with?
You do not have to learn R. You do not have to learn SPSS, right? Like you don't, no. Get a data analyst, get somebody who loves that stuff, whose passion is the quantitative. If your passion is qualitative, get a quant partner to spar with. Same thing, if your passion is quant, get somebody who's into qualitative to spar with. Use the other people in your company who have a different skill set than you to help you solve this problem, right? And I know we're short on time, so Coach has asked me for like 3 things that I want y'all to remember from this. And so I just want to get through those because these are the highlights, right? Start communication with your customers and users early. Don't wait. Do it now if you haven't already, right? Keep those lines of communication open so you don't have to wait until that churn rate is growing or at a critical level, right? Continue to take the pulse of your users. So communication, keep it open and flowing. Number 2 goes to this point, right? It's like the mixed methods thing. Some churn is just statistics. Some people are just going to leave. They're not all going to love you all the time. Do your segmentation so you can prevent your most valuable users from churning while also realizing you're not going to get 100% of them back no matter what you do. Focus on the problems that your company can solve. And number 3, do not waste people's time asking where the problems lie if you're not willing to put in the work to fix them. Be realistic about what your teams can accomplish, whether you have the tech capability, the customer service resources, the money, the time, etc. Right? So don't go out and promise the world to try to get a user back when you know you're not going to be able to deliver.
Yeah. Thanks so much. Very well summarized. I love that. I still see a few questions and comments, and there. let's do the following. Erica, do you have a couple of more minutes, or are
Yeah.
you?
Yeah.
Okay. Then
If people need to leave, they can leave. But if you want me to keep answering, I can keep answering for the next
No,
5 minutes.
because I really love. There are three more comments, and they just got my mind thinking. So Nishant is asking something very practical about MPS, and this. I think with freemium models, you start with a trial period, and then your biggest worry is, okay, oh my God, are they gonna leave now, or are they gonna upgrade to a paid model? And the question is about the MPS survey, where to position this, when to send it out.
I think, yes, this is a good time to send it. I also think that this is a good time to do like an MPS plus. So ask 3 questions in this survey. So give them the MPS, just like, would you recommend us to a friend, 1 to 10? What did you like? What could be even better? What could we do better? You may or may not get answers to those open-ended questions, but if you do, you can start collecting that data and seeing patterns to see what people liked, what they didn't like, what they thought they needed more, and start to already build that into your process of what's coming down the pipeline for the next quarter or the next year. So yeah, absolutely. It's never too early to do that. I think 30 days, yeah, is fine.
One more thing that I wanted to build on top of what Erica just said. If you send out an MPS, which already has like this free text box where people can leave their comments, I heard it from and saw it with multiple companies that the people who leave comments for the MPS have a higher likelihood to join you for a call, for a user research call. So that's actually a very good pool that you can start building for people who you want to approach later on for interview purposes. All right. I have a comment from Daniel. I'm going to put it up here. It's not a question. It's about pricing. That when people want to cancel, you can offer that to a lower price. I love this example. One thing that I want to share here is my experience with Apollo, a large prospecting tool. I had this $50 offer from them, and when I wanted to cancel, they offered me to have a monthly subscription for $10 for 12 months. And it actually got me angry. It got me angry that if they're willing to give it to me for $10 for the next year, then why did I pay $50 up until now? It's just a personal experience, and I'm not a pricing expert at all. But there, the magnitude of discount was just so vast that it somehow generated a negative sentiment with me. But I stayed a client. I
much cheaper. Yeah, exactly. And any American on the call can tell you, like, that's how we would get cheaper cable, is like you call your cable company and threaten to cancel, and they make it so hard to cancel, and you just keep insisting, and that price keeps dropping, and then, oh, they're throwing in Max, and they're throwing in the football channel, and it's like, by the end of it, it's like you have twice as many services for half the price. And it's like, okay, and then I'll do it again in 2 years when they try to raise the price again.
Oh, well. All right. That's a nice final word. Just call your cable companies out there and give them a little squeeze. Yeah, exactly. Threaten them to churn. Erica, I'm really grateful that you joined. I loved our discussion, and there's so much I learned, and I'm sure the audience as well. And thanks so much also for the audience. Big love goes out to everyone for the activity, for the amazing questions, and for being with us. And with that, I'm going to wrap up, and I wish all of you a very nice evening, morning, rest of the day.